In this video, we'll be building a high performant REST API using Golang. So what I've found out is that whenever you're trying to learn a language, it's always a good idea to build some kind of CRUD-like application. It gives you a very good understanding on the fundamentals of the application. So that's exactly what we'll be doing today. We'll be building a REST API using GoFiber, which is a framework for building REST APIs in Golang. We'll be using mongodb as a database, and hopefully you all derive value from this. Let's begin now. So here I've got an empty VS Code running here. We are in the Go REST YT folder. So in here, let me open the terminal, and whenever you're starting a new project, you would give the command go mod init and the name of your project, and I'll give it as github.com and my name and the name of the project, which is Go REST. So this could be anything, but the general convention is to follow this procedure, which is github.com / your name and / the project name. If I hit enter, I should be getting a go.mod file here. So this is similar to how npm init works in JavaScript. Now let us create a folder here. So we'll be following the general convention project structure, which we have to follow in Go projects. So the main one is, first we'll create a cmd folder. Under that we'll have a main folder, and inside this we'll have a main.go file. Now it's giving me an error because there's no package here. So whenever you're creating a new file, you should always mention the package main file, and then we'll have to create a function called main. So this is from where our application starts from. So any Go project starts from this function right here. So I'll just print something in the console just to see whether everything works. So I'll just say hello world, and I'll say go run main.go. Now if I hit enter, this should give me an error because whenever you're running this, you should be in the same level as the main.go file. So I'll cd into cmd and I'll go to the main folder, and in here if I run the server now, it should work. I should be getting hello world. Yeah, so this works. So this means our function is running properly. So now let us first start off by creating the database. So let's establish a database connection. So now we'll need another folder called package in the root level itself. So here I'll create a folder called pkg, and in here I'll have a new folder called config, and inside that I'll have a file called setup.go. So now I'll have to mention the folder name. So it's package config, and we'll have a func ConnectDb. So this is where we'll establish the connection to our database. So now in order to establish a connection, we'll have to create an account in mongodb. So let's go there. So I'm in the mongodb website here. So this is the login page. I'll just log in. So since I've already created an account, I don't have to sign up. I'll just straight away log in. Once you've created an account and logged in, this should be the page which you're directed to. So the first thing which you'll need is to build a database, and we'll go with the free trial, and I'll leave all this to its default value and say create. Okay, so now you'll have to give a username. So I'll just say, I'll give it my name and I'll give it a password, and I'll say create user. Next up, we'll go to the database again. We'll actually need to create a database, so I'll have to connect it. So let's say connect. We'll be just click the first option, which is driver. Then as we're using Go, just mention it as Go, and the latest version. We'll also have to install this, so I'll just copy this go back to VS Code, and in here I'll just say go get mongodb driver. I'll hit enter. I'll go back to the browser here, and you'll need this file to, you'll need this string to connect to your database, so I'll copy that as well. Go back here and I'll create a .env file because this should be protected, and then I'll say mongodb URI, and I'll paste this in here. And for the username, you'll have to give the username which you just created, which is Tabish in my case, and the password in my case is just admin, and I'll go back. So after you've done all this, you can just close it, and it should create a database for you. Now we'll create it. So in here, let's just hit browse collection, add my own data. So the database name is card, and the collection name is cards collection. I'll actually call it database name as cards, and I'll just create it, and this should create a database for me. Yeah, cards collection, and we are in the cards, cards database and cards collection. So we've set up a database. Now let's go back to VS Code. Now we'll have to do all the configurations. So let's go back to setup.go file, and whenever you're facing troubles, just go to the documentation. So if I go to quick start go, you can see like they've got a very good documentation here. So I've just looked at how to connect to their database and just followed it through. So we'll see right here, this is the code which you'll need for connecting to the database, but I've made quite a few changes to this. I'll explain what I'm doing now, but first let me just write it down. So ctx cancel, what we're doing right now is we are creating a context. So whenever you're connecting to a database, making queries, or having API requests, it's always a good practice to have a context. I'll give you an example on what context is, and you'll also have to differ, say cancel. So what this means is basically the differ keyword is describes a function that should be run after your parent function finishes running. So we just cancel out the context just to release the resources when a timeout is created. So let me just import this, and I'll give you an example on what exactly context is. So we'll have to import the two packages for context and time. The purpose of context in Go is to create a timeout. So basically whenever you're making an API call or having a database connection, we don't want that connection to run forever, right? So we give it a timeout. So in this, a deadline, so to speak. So in this case, I'm giving it a deadline of 10 seconds. So after this 10 seconds, the context is cancelled out and the connection is removed. So let me just create a function that mimics an API call. So I'll have a function called API call, and inside that I'll have a context. So it will receive a context, and the return type would be a string and an error. Now inside this, if I create a timeout, a sleep function, so this will create a sleep function of 2 seconds. So I'll say time.seconds. Cool. So this will wait for 2 seconds and then start going to the next line. So in here I'll just mention it as 1 second, and inside this I'll say if ctx.error, and if this is of context dot deadline exceeded, will return an error string, and we'll also have to say we give it an error message. So errors dot new, this will create a new error message for us, and I'll say context time exceeded. Now I'll also have to import this, so I'll import that. Sometimes VS Code doesn't help. So if it's successful, if it does not exceed that time, we'll say API call success, and I'll say the error is nothing, nil. Okay, so now in here what I'll say is I'll basically call that function. So it'll return me two things. I'll say message and error, and I'll say call that function, give it the context, and then if there is an error, so if error is not nil, essentially I'll say log dot fatal. So this will log out the error message for me, error calling API, and I'll give it a string. So %s, I'll say err, but if it's not an error, I'll just print out the message which is coming from the function. So println msg, I'll say fmt, and I'm getting an error. Why am I getting an error here? So I'm getting an error because this should be a walrus operator. So now all the errors should be gone, and this should be capital. Yeah, so that should fix everything. So now you can see here, I've created a timeout function of 1 second. So if the API call is not made in 1 second, it'll throw an error, and this API function sleeps for 2 seconds. So this technically should exceed the deadline and should print out this error message right here. Now let me just save this and say main go run main.go. Now if I wait for 1 second, you can see error calling API, context time exceeds for, yeah, exceeds spelling is wrong, but never mind that. So now what happens if I wait for 3 seconds? So now this context will wait for 3 seconds for this API call to be made. So, and we are sleeping for 2 seconds. So technically this function should work. Now if I hit go run main.go, it should print out API call success. So that's how we use context in Go. We use it for setting deadlines for API calls and database connections. So hopefully you get what the purpose of context is. Now we'll start again setting up our database. So I'll just remove all of this, and yeah, so that the error message goes away. Fine. Now let us go back to our setup.go file, and in here again we've created a timeout function of 10 seconds. So this since we are establishing a connection with the database, it will take some time. Okay, so once we've done that, let me go back to the documentation now. So you can see here we'll need this part right here, and if I go back here, go to my VS Code, I'll just paste in right here. So I'll import everything, options as well, and the URI. Okay, so we'll have to create a function for that as well. So you can see they've created context.todo, and this is basically when you have not set a context, and this creates an empty context without any deadlines. But since we've created a context or a timeout function of 10 seconds, we'll just pass in that. So instead of context.todo, I'll just give in our context right here. Again, I've made a mistake here. This should be a walrus operator, and here it's saying apply URI. So you'll have to pass in your URI, which is in a .env file. So since this is a secret and you shouldn't be showing this to everybody, we'll create a function for us to load that env. So let me go to our config file again. So in here, let me create a new file called loadenv.go, and here again will be package config, and in here we'll have to create a function called get mongo URI, and we'll also give a return type. So for this, the return type is string, and now we'll need to install a package called joho.env. So this is a very neat little package which was created by Joho, I think. So it's joho go.env. So this package will allow us to load our env files. You can can see how it works here. So we'll install this. I'll copy that, go back here, paste right here, go back to our browser, and you can see how it's being used here. So this is how it is used. You just call god.env and .load function, and you print out the error if it throws an error. So we'll abstract this into a function so that we can call it in just one line. So in here, I think it's installed now. Yeah, it's installed. So in here, I can say I'll import it first. So import from github.com/joho/go.env. Cool. Again, it throws me an error, important not used. Cool. So that means it's installed. So now again, if you go back to here, this is how it's being loaded. I'll just copy this, go back here, paste it right here, import the necessary package, and then whatever string it returns, I mean once the go.env is loaded, we can return the string. So to access that .env, use we'll need to install another package called os, and just say get env and say mongo URI. Let me just copy this and double check the spelling here. Yep, I knew I made a mistake here. Mongo URI. Yeah, that's fine. I'll save that, go back here, save this as well. So we have our function here. So let me go back to a setup.go file, and in here what I can do is I can just call that function so that it loads it for me. So get mongo URI. And now if you've noticed it, since we are in the same file, I can just call get mongo URI without actually specifying from where it is coming from. So that's just a side note. So once we have that, again you can see I'm getting an error. This is because Go always throws an error if you're not using something. So if you didn't want to use this, you would just say underscore, so it doesn't throw you an error. But we'll be needing the client because we'll have to establish a connection. Okay, so if now let us say client, we'll also ping the database. So this allows us to see the responsiveness of the our database. So I'll give it the context again, and I'll say read pref dot primary. Again, this is everything is from the documentation itself. I don't remember anything off the top of my head. I just look at the documentation, and if there is an error, I print out nil. Okay, so why am I getting an error? Okay, this should not be a walrus operator, and this should be client. Cool. So then I can say fmt. I'll just print to the console saying that the connection was successful. So connected to MongoDB. Cool. So now what we can do is okay, so now at the top here I'll create a variable called my client, and I'll give it the type of mongo dot client. Cool. And then what I can do is I can come down here and say my client is equal to client. Basically why we are doing this is because whenever you're calling my client in other files, it'll point towards the same client every time you call it. That's why we're doing it in such a manner. Whenever you establish a connection, we just put the client to the my client, so that we always point towards whenever we are accessing my client, it's the same client, and you're not creating a new client every time you call this function. So that's the reason why we are doing it this way. Now once I've saved that, I'll go back to main.go file, and I'll just call that file. I mean call that function. So config.connectDb, and I'll remove this. Now I should be getting that connect. Okay, so it's saying error loading.env file. Fine. So because we've given it a proper error message, I know exactly where the error is. So the error is in this part because it's logging out that particular error which is mentioned here. So this is probably because you, in the load function, you have to provide it the relative path. So in here I'll just say, since this is in the load env, this is inside the package config, you'll have to give it the exact path. So the exact path is .env. Cool. So we go 2 directories up and then we can access the .env file. If I save this and if I run the server again, I should be getting connected to MongoDB. Okay, cool. So now our project is connected to MongoDB. So the next step is, we also, if I go back to my Firefox here and go here, now we'll need a function to access the data or get the collections, so that we can access the collection. We can add, read, update, delete, etc. So now we'll have to create a function for that. So again, let me go to VS Code, and in our setup function, just under our ConnectDB, let's create that. So func get collection, and this will receive a collection which will be of string type, and it'll return a mongo dot collection. And you can just, I can say if my client, if my client is nil, I can just print out a message. So log fatal, and give a message saying let's say MongoDB client is not initialized, make sure to call ConnectDb. So now if this error message runs, I know where exactly the error is. Again, it's always a good idea to have a descriptive error message. So again, now I'll say my client, so this call refers to collection, so my client dot database, so the database name is cards, and it points to the collection is whatever the collection we are passing through the function. And if the call is nil, which means it's not there, then we can again say log dot fatal collection not found. So the other thing which I love about Go is that you can handle the error message however you feel like handling it. It's not like how we handle errors in TypeScript or JavaScript. Okay, so this should be done, and the place where I got this code from is again from the documentation. So if you say quick start Go, it's all in here. So you can see it's right here. So I've just put that in a function. So if I go back to our setup function, so that's also ready. So we can now get the collection whenever we call this function. Okay, so with that, I believe our connection to our database is done. Now we'll have to create endpoints. So now to create endpoints, we'll need another package called Go Fiber. So if I go to Firefox in here, and let me actually go to, let's say, Go Fiber, to the actual documentation if it's in here, and you can check out the documentation. So let me see where the get started places. Cool. So I got it. So now I'll just copy in this, go back here. So Go Fiber allows us to create servers very easily in a more Express-like manner, express.js to be specific. So okay, so yeah, so that's installed. Now all we have to do is say app.listen. Okay, it's cool. Okay, so I have to actually initialize it. So if I go to the documentation again, you can see, okay, So here they've not mentioned it. Okay, yeah, here, right here. Cool. So I'll just copy this, go back to VS Code, paste in right here, import this. Now I'll say app.listen. Let's say it'll be on port 8000. Hit save. Okay, I'm getting an error here. That's because of this. Okay, I don't know why that is. Okay, I'll just run the server and see whether it works. Okay, so I'm getting some error message, so I'll just say go mod tidy. Okay, so this command go mod tidy is a very handy command which actually sees what imports you're making and basically installs all the imports which you're using and deletes the ones which you're not. So yeah, sometimes when you install packages and all, you might come across those errors. So just hit go mod tidy or just manually install it if it's showing you an error. So now that's done. Now let me just run the server. Okay, cool. So you can see it's connected to DB, and we are also getting this neat little UI saying that our fiber, our server is listening to port 8000. Cool. So with this, we've also created a server. Now the next step is to create the routes for this. So again, under the package folder, we can have a new folder called routes. So ROUTES, and under routes, let's call it card route underscore route dot go. Now again, I'll have to mention the package, which is the routes, and inside this we'll have func. We'll call it card route, and this will cool. Okay, it already did it for me. Fine. I believe, okay, whatever. So we are creating a card route, and it receives this app which is in the main folder. This app will be given to this function right here. I'll also have to import this fiber, and now these are all the functions which are yet to be created. So if I go back to the documentation here, just to show you all how this thing works. So if I just copy out this part, and I'll actually delete all this, paste it right here. Okay, so this route, this slash route should just send hello world to as the JSON. So now let me call that here. So I'll say route routes dot card route, and I'll have to give it the app. So app. If I hit save, and I'll cancel out the server, run it again, wait for a few seconds. Cool. Now I'll go to something like Postman, and in here let me create a new request. Like, okay, let me just create a new request here, add request. I'll copy this out. This is just to check whether our Go Fiber is working. So this will be an empty thing, empty get request to the root, and if I hit send, I should be getting hello world, which was mentioned right here. It's an empty which should send hello world. Okay, now let's actually start building on top of this. So app.get, the first thing which we'll do is we'll create a card. App.post and the route is /card card, and this will be coming from this will create, we'll have to create a function called create card. Now this is giving me an error here because this is undefined. So now since we've created our first route, we'll also have to create certain other things, which is the model. So model will be again under package, so new folder model, and under the new models we'll have a card.go. So this will basically give us the structure on how our body should look like. So card.go. So this is similar to how MVC, if you all know what the MVC paradigm is, it's similar to how that is. So package models, we are basically defining how our body should look, or the template of our body. So let's say we'll create a type card struct, and if you are very new to this, just check out the first video. I go through all the basics of struct interfaces and all. So now our card struct should have an ID, and this should be of primitive dot object ID. Again, this is from their documentation. So mongodb accepts the primitive dot object type, so that's why you have to mention as this type. And then whenever you're sending JSON, because Go doesn't natively support JSON, we'll have to do something a little bit different. So it's like you have to say JSON and give double colon double quotes and the ID, the small letter of this. So this is how we give JSON in Go. I know it's a little bit weird, especially if you're coming from JavaScript, which is seems very seamless. You just have to say dot and it just comes up. It just automatically sends it as JSON. But Go doesn't work that way. You have to mention, you have to give it this weird little tag. I believe this is called as a tag. Okay, cool. So again, we'll have a name, which is string type, and JSON name, and this is number. This will be of int, and again I'll just copy this right here and try to paste it right here, and I'll say a number. Cool. So I think with this we've defined the shape of our the object, which will be not objects, sorry, but the struct which will be sending to the server. Cool. Now let us go back to card routes. It's giving me an error here because this function does not exist. So in order to create that function, we'll have to create a controller folder. So in here we'll mention all those functions which will go here. So under the control, I'll call controllers, and in here I'll say card underscore controller dot go. In here I'll mention the package name, so package controllers, and we'll call the func create card. So create card, and this will receive a C fiber. Okay, this is fine. And now I'll probably have to import this, and yeah, this will be okay, that's cool. So now we can just go back here and say controllers. Okay, there's no suggestion here. Controllers, I'll probably have to save this. Okay, I'll just, for now I'll just save it so that basically little control. Yeah, got it. So controllers dot create card. Okay, cool. Now the error is gone, so now it won't bother me. Whenever there's that red color, it's, I don't know, for some reason it bothers me a lot. So I just wanted to get that rid of. So now the first thing I'll say is I'll print out a message here saying this endpoint was hit, so that if anything, if we get an error, I know from where it is coming from. So create endpoint hit. Cool. Again, we'll have to create a context because we are making a query to the backend. So we'll give it a deadline and mention how much time it should take. So again, we'll do 10 seconds is too much. I'll give it as 5. Import context and time as well. Good. Now once this function finishes executing, I want to clean up that timeout function as well. So we give defer cancel. So whenever you give mention defer, that function runs whenever the parent function finishes running. So with that, we've created it. So now we'll create a new instance of models.card. So this is how you create a card struct of the model, like of the card struct. So once that's done, now we'll have to get the if I go back to card, so we'll have to get the name and number, which we'll have to get the name and number from the body of the request. So for that, it's if error walrus operator c dot body parser. So this basically parses the body, and I'll give it an address of operator card, so that we are pointing to this one right here. And I'll say okay, so if error is not equal to nil, then will return something. So c dot status right here, and say http dot status bad request, and I'll say dot json. This should probably be capital json. Cool. And I can say card. So for the JSON part, instead of just passing in then the empty card, let's give it a proper response whenever there's a bad request. So under, let's say under okay, well, let's just create a new folder called responses, and in this we'll mention the template of how the JSON response should look like. So here I'll say card response dot go, and in here what we can do is we can just call that response and create a new struct. So type card response struct. This will have a status which will be an int, and I'll give a template literal JSON status. Again, the same thing with message, which will be a string, and this will be JSON message, and then data, which will be an empty interface. Again, if you don't know what interface is, check out the last video. I go over what these are, the basics of Go. Let's go back here. Now, instead of just giving it the card, we can give it a good, like a better response. So responses dot card response, and we can give it the status as, let's say http dot, okay, it's giving me a suggestion. This is what I wanted. err, I'll give it an error message. Cool. So with that, I guess if there's an error while passing the body, it's done. Okay. Next up should be, we'll create a new card. So since we are creating a new card, let's do this. Let's create models.card, and in that, for the ID, we'll need to give an ID which is acceptable by the backend, by MongoDB. So it's primitive.objectID. Again, this is from the documentation. This should be new object ID. New object ID. Yep. And then it's the name, which will be card.name, and then it will be the number, which is card.number. So we have our new card, which we can send it to the backend. So now we'll have to give it to Mongo. So okay, so as you can see, I've given an underscore here because models, no, sorry, okay, fine, this is wrong. We'll have to first call the collection. So for that, what we can do is, initially we can initialize var card collection, because right now we don't know which collection we are working on, so we'll need that. So let's say cards collection will be of type mongo collection star, so that's again consistent. Wherever we use this is the same thing, it's the same collection. And I'll say configs dot get collection, and if you remember, it accepts in a string which is cards collection. Yeah, cards collection right here. So if I go back to my config, which should be here, where was it? Okay, yeah, it was in setup. You can see here, get collection takes in a string, gives out a mongo.collection, and that is what basically we are doing here, cards collection. Now we can get that, so I'll say /err, give the walrus operator, say cards collection dot, you can see we have a bunch of these functions. So the one which we will need is insert one. I give the ctx the context, and I'll give it the new card. Oh, actually, yeah, I think that's what I wanted, I believe. Yeah, I can, yeah, that's fine. So now I can again, if everything is successful, I can just say c.status, and I can give http is created. I'll just take in that suggestion from the AI json response new card. What's the error? I can give it the new card as well. Okay, cool. So I think that is all. So I'll save it. Now we can just check whether this route works or not. So card, fine. Now let me check it. I'll terminate the server, run it again. Okay, so mongodb client is not initialized, make sure to, okay, so I know where the error is again. If I go to main.go, so in here we are initializing it, but if I go to our setup.go file, here probably it's not being initialized. Fine. So what we can do is, let's create another function called init. So this function basically runs whenever we run this project with the go run main.go, this function is automatically run. So here what I can do is I can just say ConnectDb, I'll call it here, and I'll save it. Now if I run the server again, it should, yeah, connected to MongoDB, and our server is also listening to port 8000. But you can see it's getting connected twice. So what I can do is I can go back here, I can just comment this out, and I'll save it, and then if I terminate the server, run it again, let's see whether this works. Okay, cool. So with that init function, we make sure that whenever we run the server, this ConnectDB is executed. So that's why now we don't get an error. I believe we are getting a collection as well. Now let's test this endpoint out. So let's go back here. So this is Postman here, and I've already created all the routes which we will be needing. So this is create card, under card body name. In the body I'm passing the name and the number as well. So now let's try it. I send, you can see we're getting the output status 201 message success data. So which means our endpoint works, and you can see here create endpoint hit. So if I go to controller here, you can see create endpoint hit. If I go to Mongo Atla, and if I refresh this, we should be getting that data. Yes, cool. So here we've gotten it here, and you can see we are getting two IDs, because if I go back to VS Code here, you can see we have an ID field here, but whenever you're passing in a data to Mongo Atla, it automatically creates an ID for us, which is underscore ID. But with this, what we're doing is we are basically creating a new field with ID instead of underscore ID, and we are passing it to the database. So that's much more easier for us to access this attribute ID. Instead of underscore ID, it'll just be ID, which is mentioned right here. See, here, JSON ID. So that's what we are doing. So now we can have we can start building the other routes as well. So if I go to my routes here and just copy paste all this, so we'll create a get request, so for a single card, and to dynamically get the ID, it's colon ID, and we'll create a new function called get card. This will be, again, it will get a single card for us, and we can actually just define all the routes and keep it here. Get for all the cards, so get cards, get all cards, and let's have next is delete. Let's have delete. Again, this will have an ID, and this will be delete card, and finally we'll have the put. So to update it, we'll receive an ID and we'll say update card. Now again, this is giving me an error. I'll just comment out the ones which I don't need because it disturbs me for some reason. Okay, so since we've created our function for this, I'll just minimize this. I'll also get rid of this. Now it's much better. Now let's create a new function for getting a single card. So under here, I'll just say, you know what, actually I'll just copy this out because it's roughly the same. Okay, so now I can say get card. I'll say get endpoint hit, series acting up, ctx, we create.
Sure. Translate into which language?
Okay, cool. So we create a context. We make sure we clean up that function, the timeout function. Then we create, oops. Okay. Then we create a card, so that we can, whatever body which we're getting, we can change it to this struct right here. So now in here, since get card receives an ID through the params, we can get the params in Go Fiber by saying card ID, have the walrus operator, say c dot params, and give it that value ID. And now, okay, so just let me just write this down and I'll explain what I'm doing here. See, so I'm using primitive dot object ID from hex because that is what is required by MongoDB Atla. So if you see here, if you go to their documentation, should be in, let me just search for that and come get back to y'all. It took me some digging, but I finally found it. So right here, if you go to their if you just go to this URL, so if you want to find by ID, you can see here it's mentioned right here. You'll have to convert the ID which you're receiving into object ID from hex. So basically that's what we're doing here. We are converting the ID which we're getting from as params and converting it to object ID from hex, which is accepted by the Mongo Atla. Cool. So now in here we don't have to parse the body and we don't have to create a new card as well. So in here we can say cards collection, and instead of inserting we'll say find one, and we'll have to give it the context to make sure we set it, give it a deadline. So when we are generally working with Go and Mongo Atla, we don't generally send JSON, we use something like bson. So if I just paste in an example here, so this is how JSON looks like. It's a more human readable, in a more human readable format. You can understand what we are passing. But this is what bson looks like, which is binary JavaScript object notation. So the difference of this is like it makes it more faster because it does not have to convert this JSON to this format for the computer to understand it. So that's one of the very main reasons why I use bson instead of JSON. So that's that was just an example for y'all. So in here, the second parameter is the bson dot m. So m basically means we are sending the document in an unordered list format. So in here you'll have to mention the filter, which is id, and the key and value as well, id. And to get the result, we'll have to decode it and pass in the card. I'm getting an error. If I hover here, it says two variables, returns only one. Okay, cool. So this is because of this. And now I'm getting an error here because of this. Cool. Now if I go back to the documentation, again, all of this is from the documentation itself. I don't remember all of this like at the top of my head. Like I have to look at the documentation. The documentation they mentioned to do it like so. So that's what we are doing. And now if error is nil, that's fine. And for the data, we can just give in the card. So what this basically does is whatever results we get, the results will be decoded into this format here, card, and you'll get that data. Okay, now all that remains is like cancel your server, run it again, and we'll test this endpoint out now. Okay, I forgot to save this as well, so I'll do again the same thing. I'll terminate the server, run it again, and it's a bit slow. Okay, so okay, cool. Now if I go back here, say get card by ID. Okay, I'll just, what was it? Okay, I needed the ID here, so I'll take this ID, copy it, and pass in the params. I'll say send. Okay, I'm getting in that data. So let us just create a few more cards. So test2, I'll give it some random numbers. I'll send again. I should create a new one. Let me create test3. That's cool. Send. Cool. Now we have 3. Now let's create an endpoint for getting all the cards. So again, go to main.go, card routes. Here let's just say get all cards. Come back here, and we'll just copy in this and paste it here, right here, and say get all cards. The error is gone. So get all cards endpoint hit, and again it's the same drill. We create a context, say cards, but this time since it will be an array, I'll just give it an array here because it will be an array of cards. Defer cancel, and I can say okay, we don't need the params here. We don't have to convert it also. Yeah, I don't think none of this is also required. So let me just go up here and say result error, which will be coming from cards collection dot find ctx bson dot m. Okay, I'll say okay, defer result dot close ctx. I'll have to give it the context. Now what this basically does is it gives us a list of the IDs. So let me print out that. So dot print result. I think that's fine. I'll just save this as well. You can see okay, I'll just hit this endpoint and show you all what's happening. Let's so that you'll get a better understanding of what the results look like and what we'll be doing. Okay, so it's running. I go back here, get all cards, hit that endpoint. I'm getting an empty data because we are not sending anything. You can see here we're getting something weird, which is like it's a array of which seems to look like some data. We can see here it's 3. I think this is the length of the result, which is 3. So we don't get the exact data as how we want to get. So what we have to do is we'll have to loop over this, which is an array. So now let's say for result dot next ctx. Again, this is from the documentation, can't stress that out enough. And we loop over this. We define a new card called models.card, and we say error. We define error result.decode. So we're decoding all the cards and say and card. If I hover here, you can see it has only one. It returns only one value, which is an error. That's why it's err here. So that's how I know how much to define, how many parameters to define or not. So now nil. Again, I'll say log dot fatal, and I'll say err, and at the down below here I'll call this again. Okay, so this should be plural. Cards is equal to, and the way you append data, like whatever the result you get, the card here, we want to insert into this arrays right here. So the way you do that is you call in a function called append, call this array here cards, and the value which has to be appended to this array, so that is card. So now we have the cards array. So again, if error is nil, that's fine, and we can just pass in the cards. I'll save that. Now I'll close the server, run it again, and I'll hit this endpoint again. Now you can see we are getting an array of those cards. Cool. So get all cards also done. Next up, we can again, let's create a function for deleting the card. So this will be delete card, go back to card route, open this, and make sure to save this as well. Go back here. So in here for delete card, again we'll say print ln delete endpoint hit. We create a context. We don't actually need to create a card instance here. We cancel it. We get the ID. We convert the ID again, because I showed you in the documentation is what is required. And in here, instead of find one, we say delete one. It's giving me an error. If you see, the first thing is we get two things here, which is Mongo delete result and an error. So we'll have to say again here result, and here card delete ctx bson.m. That's fine, and there's no decode here. Cool. So that's also done. Okay, and instead of error, I can give another condition saying if result, this is basically an array of how many how many data was deleted. So result dot delete count, if it's less than 1, then we can return something. Cool. This is what the response will be sending to the backend, and here we can just say card deleted successfully. So now if you wanted to send the data, like the struct which you were deleting, the card data, what I would do is, since this doesn't return as that, what I would do is I would have another I would make another call to the Mongo to find that result. So basically, if I go to here, what I could do is I could just say, I could call this function right here, they just change all the values. create that card struct, and you'll have that card and you can send it back to the backend. But I don't want to unnecessarily make calls, so I'll just leave it at that. So this is how delete card works. If I terminate the server, run it again, go back here, it was delete, and let's go here, delete the test1, copy this out here, come back here, give the ID, send it, and you can see card deleted successfully. If I say get all cards, you can see we have only 2 entries here. Okay, now the final one is the delete function. So again, go back here, uncomment out this. I will we can actually copy the same one as create. I think it should be similar to how create works. Here, down here, and I'll say update card. Let's say update endpoint hit. Again, we create a context. So we create a card, we defer it, get the ID, and this time we'll have to pass the body. So if I go back to, where do I pass the body? Okay, here. I'll just copy this because I don't want to type everything again. So this should be here. I will body parser card error. That's fine. Cool. Okay, cool. So we have everything. Now we can say updated card. Oh, okay, this is not a function. This will be updated card. Walrus operator. We say bson dot m. We give it the name. So since we have only 2 entries here, we say name. Say card dot name, and number card dot number. Again, this is from their documentation. This should be small letters. So we are mentioning the name key should be card dot name and number should be card dot number. This is the value which should be given to the Mongo Atla. So now in here we'll say, instead of find one, we'll say update one, and if I hover here, we are getting 2 results. One is the result. So first thing is I'll change it to result. ERR card collection update 1 CTX. So next one is, this is the filter. If I hover here, this is the filter. So which data should this function fire to? So that's bson.m, and which is ID, and in here I can say next up is bson.m $set updated card, and we don't need to decode it. So I'll say okay. So yeah, I'll go back to the documentation again. Now in here we can see retrieve data. So instead of read operation, if I go to write operation, update arrays in a document, you can see okay, yeah, right here. This is from where I got that code from. So you can just refer to this on how to do, like how to give it filter values and update values. So yeah, so this is from where I got it. I changed it according to my use case, so that's why it's like so. And now once we have the updated card, we've given the values. If there is an error, we give it the response which is required. Next is if result. Again, this is result dot matched count is less than 1. Basically means it has an error, so I give it an error message saying card not found. Else I can just say I can just send in that card right here. So I'll save it, save this as well. Now I'll go back here, npm rom. Now go back here, update card. So I'll just copy the ID here, go to update card, put the ID right here, updated name 666. I send in the request. You can see ID 0, updated name 66, get all card. Cool. So I'm getting it here, but the response for the update is 000. Okay, that's because we are sending in the card which you are receiving from the body. So the body has just the name and the number, it doesn't have the ID. So what I can do is I can just say card dot ID is equal to ID. That should solve our problem. So if I terminate and run the server again, go back here, so I'll just send that the same request. So now you can see we have that ID right here and it reflects right here. Cool. So with this we've built a CRUD like application, and not CRUD like, it's a CRUD application, and hopefully you learned something new here. And let me know in the comments section below whether you want the videos to be short and concise, or you want me to actually explain each and every line of whatever I'm doing. So yeah, so this has basically been it, and thanks for watching.